In 1960, two men touched the bottom of the world and swore something was already down there, waiting for them. 7 miles down. Pressure strong enough to crush a submarine like a soda can. A place scientists had calculated no living thing could survive. And when the two men inside a steel ball barely 6 feet wide finally reached it, they say they saw something moving. Here's the part that should bother you more than the sighting itself. After that dive, nobody went back down to check for over 50 years. Not because it failed, because of what happened right after it worked. Let's go back to the moment they hit bottom. Before we reveal why humanity stayed away for 52 years, hit like and subscribe. You'll see why this dive became legendary. The dive itself. On January 23, 1960, Swiss oceanographer Jacques Piccard and U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh climbed into the tiny pressure sphere of the Trieste and began one of the most daring expeditions in history, a descent to Challenger Deep, the deepest known point in the Mariana Trench. The journey to the bottom lasted nearly 5 hours. As the Trieste sank deeper into the Pacific, the pressure outside increased to more than 1,000 times what we experience at sea level. At those unimaginable depths, steel doesn't behave the way it does on the surface. The hull creaks, the metal groans, and every seal is pushed to its absolute limit. Then, halfway through the descent, something terrifying happened. One of the outer acrylic window panes cracked, sending a powerful shock through the entire submersible. For most people, that would have been the end of the mission. But Piccard and Walsh made the incredible decision to continue downward. After hours of descending through total darkness, they finally reached the ocean floor at a depth of about 35,800 feet. As they looked through the small viewport, they reported seeing something completely unexpected, a flatfish slowly gliding across the soft sediment. That single observation has sparked debate for more than 6 decades. Most marine scientists believe fish should not be able to survive much deeper than 27,000 feet, almost 1.5 miles shallower than where the Trieste landed. Was it truly a fish, or could it have been another creature, perhaps misidentified through dim lighting and a scratched viewing window? Even today, no one can say for certain. Whatever they actually saw, one fact is undeniable. The mission proved something the world had never demonstrated before. Human beings could travel to the deepest place on Earth and return alive. After resurfacing, Piccard and Walsh believed they had opened the door to a new era of deep-sea exploration. Standing aboard their support ship, they confidently predicted that another expedition to Challenger Deep would happen within 2 or 3 years. They couldn't have been more wrong. Instead, humanity stayed away for more than half a century, and the reason why is the part of this story that almost nobody talks about: the 52-year silence. For more than 50 years, nobody returned to the deepest place on Earth. After the historic 1960 Trieste expedition, the Challenger Deep was left untouched by humans for over 5 decades. By the end of the 1960s, the U.S. Navy had quietly scaled back its manned deep ocean program. The legendary Trieste, and every deep-diving vessel that followed, was limited to depths shallower than 6,000 meters, far above the deepest part of the Mariana Trench it had already reached. Don Walsh later admitted that this long silence surprised even him. In interviews years later, he described it as genuinely remarkable that decade after decade passed without a single return to the Challenger Deep. Everyone expected another expedition within a few years. Instead, more than half a century went by. It wasn't until 2012 that another human finally reached the bottom. That explorer was filmmaker James Cameron, who made the journey alone in a specially designed submersible he helped build, the Deep Sea Challenger. Between the first human dive in 1960 and Cameron's mission in 2012, only robotic explorers ventured into the abyss. An unmanned vehicle named Kaiko successfully reached the sea floor in the late 1990s, followed by another robotic vehicle, Nereus, in 2009. Both proved the journey was possible, but neither carried a human on board. Then, in 2019, explorer Victor Vescovo pushed exploration even further. Piloting the limiting factor, he became the first person to visit the Challenger Deep multiple times. He later completed the historic 5 Deeps expedition, becoming the first explorer to reach the deepest point in all 5 of the world's oceans. So why did humanity stay away for 52 years? It wasn't because of a cover-up or some hidden secret. The real reasons were far more practical, and in many ways, far more daunting. The challenges came down to enormous costs, extreme danger, and shifting priorities that pulled funding and attention elsewhere. Let's break down exactly why. Why going back is so hard. Building something that can survive the pressure at the bottom of the Challenger Deep is less like building a submarine and more like building a spacecraft. Even today, only a small handful of vessels on the entire planet, roughly 10 according to recent counts, are certified to reach true, full ocean depth. Compare that to space travel, where more than 2,800 rockets launched in a single recent year alone. The imbalance goes back to the very beginning. A retired U.S. Navy admiral once pointed out that the original Trieste dive received almost no public attention, especially compared to the massive publicity campaign that surrounded the first American astronauts barely a year later. Space exploration got national headlines, dedicated government agencies, and enormous long-term funding. Deep ocean exploration got a single successful dive, and then years of budget decisions that quietly sent the money somewhere else. Each certified deep-sea submersible costs tens of millions of dollars to build and maintain, and only a small number of countries have ever been willing to fund one. And the danger never really went away either. In 2023, a privately built tourist submersible called Titan imploded while descending toward the wreck of the Titanic, killing all 5 people aboard almost instantly. It was a brutal reminder that even 6 decades after Trieste, the deep ocean has not gotten any less unforgiving. That funding gap, combined with the danger that never disappeared, didn't just slow down submarine dives, it left almost the entire ocean floor completely unseen by human eyes. And that's a fact that still holds true today. We've mapped more of Mars than we've seen of our own planet. Like that, if your mind's blown, subscribe if you want more. Now, here's exactly how little of our own planet we've actually seen. What we've actually seen. Here's a number that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. Researchers with the non-profit Ocean Discovery League recently calculated that human beings have visually observed less than 0.001% of the deep sea floor. In total area, that's a patch only slightly larger than the state of Rhode Island. On an entire planet where the ocean covers roughly 70% of the surface. As of early 2026, NOAA reports that only about 28.7% of the global seafloor has even been mapped using modern high-resolution sonar. And mapping only tells you the shape of the terrain. It tells you nothing about what's actually living down there. More than 90% of the ocean sits below 200 meters, a depth where sunlight simply cannot reach. One marine biology researcher put it bluntly. We understand the surface of the Moon and parts of Mars better than we understand our own ocean floor. despite never having pulled a single breath of oxygen or a drop of water from either place. The same research found something else worth noting. Most of the dives that have happened were clustered near a small handful of wealthy countries, which means enormous stretches of ocean elsewhere have barely been visited even once. Ships like NOAA's Okeanos Explorer now spend months at sea, running remotely operated vehicles down into these unexplored gaps. And on nearly every single expedition, they find a species that has never been formally described before. This tiny sliver of exploration, less than a Rhode Island's worth of sea floor, has still managed to turn up discoveries strange enough to rewrite entire science textbooks. The first of those discoveries didn't even come from a trench. It came from a completely ordinary research dive that stumbled onto something biology had no explanation for. Life without sunlight. In 1977, researchers exploring hydrothermal vents on the deep ocean floor made a discovery that broke a rule biology had never questioned before. Every food chain on Earth was believed to start in the same place, sunlight hitting plants, but clustered around scalding cracks in the seafloor far below any trace of light. Scientists found thriving colonies of microbes and animals pulling their energy directly from chemical reactions in the vent water instead. One researcher later called it completely revolutionary, saying it rewrote the textbooks overnight. The process is called chemosynthesis, and it means entire ecosystems can exist in total permanent darkness, feeding off minerals and heat instead of sunlight. In 2019, researchers exploring the sea floor off California and Oregon discovered an entirely new vent field they'd never seen before. They named it the Apollo Vent Field to mark the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. NASA actually built a research program around studying these vents, called Subsea, treating them as the closest thing on Earth to what might be living inside the hidden oceans of Jupiter's moon, Europa, or Saturn's moon, Enceladus. We already know Enceladus is venting water vapor from below its icy surface, because NASA's Cassini spacecraft flew directly through one of its plumes back in 2005. If life could be thriving without sunlight this whole time, right here on our own planet, it raises an obvious question nobody could answer yet. What else has been living down there, completely unnoticed, waiting decades for a camera or a trap to finally find it? The ocean that makes its own light. Long before anyone found rocks producing oxygen in total darkness, and we'll get to that, researchers already knew the deep ocean had solved its lightless problem in a different way. It simply builds its own light. A detailed video survey off the California coast, reviewing more than 350,000 individual sightings collected across 17 years of remotely operated vehicle dives, found that roughly 76% of animals living in the water column produce their own light through a chemical reaction called bioluminescence. NOAA puts the number even higher in the mid-depth zone, reporting that about 80% of animals living between 200 and 1,000 meters can glow. This isn't just the famous anglerfish dangling its glowing lure in front of its own mouth, although that's a real, well-documented behavior. Jellyfish, worms, shrimp, and squid all do it too, using light to find mates, confuse predators, or lure prey close enough to strike. One researcher involved in the survey said she doesn't think most people realize just how common this ability actually is down there, partly because regular cameras often can't even pick up the dim glow that many of these animals produce. Knowing that most of the ocean already lights itself up in ways we can barely detect makes the next kind of discovery feel a little less far-fetched, because some of the strangest life down there has nothing to do with light at all, and everything to do with surviving pressure that should, by every rule we knew, be lethal. The fish that shouldn't exist for decades. Scientists believed fish simply could not survive past a certain depth, somewhere around 8,000 to 8,500 meters, because the pressure would break down proteins inside their cells. Then, in 2014 and 2017, researchers collected a small, pale, almost see-through fish from the Mariana Trench at depths of nearly 8,000 meters. They named it the Mariana snailfish. It turned out to be the top predator of its entire ecosystem down there, actively hunting tiny shrimp-like creatures in complete darkness, under pressure that would instantly crush a human body. In 2023, an expedition filmed a related snailfish swimming even deeper at 8,336 meters, breaking the previous record and forcing scientists to push their theoretical depth limit for vertebrate life even further than they'd ever assumed possible. Researchers studying the snailfish's genes later found its skeleton was thin and incompletely formed, and its skull didn't fully close. Unusual adaptations that seemed to help its body handle pressure that would otherwise be fatal. Here's what makes this even stranger. Before this species was found, baited camera traps had been lowered into the deepest parts of several Pacific trenches over a dozen times, without a single fish ever showing up on camera. A fish living past the exact depth scientists once swore was biologically impossible, says a lot about how much guesswork is still baked into what we think we know about the deep ocean. And snailfish were far from the strangest thing waiting to be found down there. The creature that took a century to film the giant squid had been washing up dead on beaches and appearing in sailor stories for centuries, inspiring legends like the Kraken. But nobody had ever filmed one alive in its natural habitat. Every attempt failed for over 100 years, largely because bright submersible lights scared the animal away before cameras could get close enough. In 2012, a Japanese research team, led by zoologist Tsunemi Kubadera, finally succeeded, using a camera system called Medusa that relied on red light, a wavelength invisible to the squid. They filmed a 3-meter-long specimen off Japan's Ogasawara Islands. The footage overturned decades of assumptions. This wasn't a slow, drifting creature. It was a fast, aggressive hunter. 7 years later, in 2019, a NOAA-funded expedition filmed a second live giant squid, this time in the Gulf of Mexico, barely 100 miles from one of the world's largest offshore oil rigs, proof that this animal had been living far closer to human activity than anyone ever realized. A creature that large, managing to stay completely hidden from cameras for over a century, says everything about how little of the deep ocean humans have actually watched. And giant squid were far from the strangest thing waiting in that darkness either. Rocks making oxygen without any light at all. In 2013, researcher Andrew Sweetman was running seafloor experiments nearly 4,000 meters down in the Pacific's Clarion-Clipperton zone. He expected the oxygen levels inside his sealed test chambers to slowly drop as tiny organisms used it up. Instead, oxygen levels rose, climbing to more than 3 times normal background levels within just 2 days. No sunlight, no photosynthesis, nothing nearby that should explain it. Sweetman assumed his equipment was broken. He spent close to a decade recalibrating his instruments and repeating the test before he finally published the results in 2024. The source turned out to be potato-sized, metal-rich rocks scattered across the seafloor, called polymetallic nodules. These nodules carry a measurable electrical charge close to that of a standard battery, potentially strong enough to split seawater into oxygen with no biology involved at all. Other researchers have since questioned parts of the study, and in 2026, the journal noted that some aspects were still under review. But the strange oxygen readings themselves have never been explained away. And here's the part that adds real urgency to all of this. Those same nodules are now a target for deep-sea mining companies, which means the ecosystem sitting on top of them could be disturbed before scientists even finish understanding what it actually is. Spending 10 years quietly double-checking a single strange reading before going public isn't how a cover-up works. It's how careful science works when nobody wants to be wrong about something this unusual. Closing. This doesn't point to some hidden conspiracy lurking beneath the ocean. In many ways, the real explanation is even more fascinating. For more than 60 years, a relatively small community of scientists working with limited funding, a handful of specialized submersibles, and extremely rare opportunities has been trying to explore 71% of our planet, one dangerous dive at a time. And the tragic submersible accident in 2023 was a stark reminder that the risks of reaching the deepest parts of the ocean have never disappeared. What's truly remarkable is what researchers discover almost every time they make it to the bottom. Time and again, they uncover something that challenges long-held scientific beliefs. Fish have been found living far deeper than many experts once believed possible. Strange rocks have been discovered producing oxygen in complete darkness without sunlight. Entire regions of the deep ocean have been revealed to glow with bioluminescence far more frequently than anyone expected. The truth is, the ocean floor was never abandoned. It has always been there, waiting. It's simply too vast, too hostile, and incredibly expensive to explore at the pace we would like. Even after decades of research, we've examined only a tiny fraction of the deep sea. That means countless species, geological wonders, and scientific discoveries are almost certainly still hidden beneath the crushing pressure of the abyss, waiting for the next expedition to uncover them. If this blew your mind, hit like, subscribe if you want the next one.